Hello, this is Gareth King, continuing the series of videos on programming in Visual Basic for applications. An example we're going to look at here is an example to use a two-dimensional array to simplify a program that previously used nested if blocks. Here we have train fares to on five different routes in Ireland: Dublin Belfast, Dublin Cork, Dublin Galway, Dublin Limerick and Dublin Waterford. And there's three different types of fares: one way, one day return and open return. And these were real values taken from the Earnode Éireann website in not so long ago, about 6 months ago. So if you look at these fares, the way this program works, if I look at the code, is I have an application here, and it's this one here. So it's basically a form, and on the form you have a rail route here, so we have the 5 different options, and we have the fare type. And the objective here is that when the user, I have a button down here that says get the fare, and what that does, it will go and use an if block to decide which one of these routes the user has chosen and which fare type the user has chosen, and it will come up, it'll give the route, the fare type and the fare. So if it's also set up so that if we change one of the buttons here, so we go for a one-day return on the same route, it's Dublin Belfast, the fare type is a one-day return, but the fare now is €40 and the open return is 55. If we change the route over here, you can see automatically the program will work to extract the correct route, Dublin Galway, the fare type is open return and the fare is 51.40. The button will also execute it. Okay, so if you look at the way the code here works, if I just click in on that one, say, we have a subroutine called getFare, and I define an integer for route number, called route number as an integer, and an integer called fare type number. And basically the way it works is if the user chooses Dublin to Belfast, route number will be set to 1. If the user chooses Dublin to Cork, the route number will have a value 2. If they choose Dublin to Galway, the route number should be assigned a value 3, and if it's Dublin Limerick, it should be assigned a value 4, and Dublin Waterford a value of 5. So basically what this bit of code here does, it will come through each time this subroutine is executed, it will check all 5 different radio buttons, or option buttons on the form. So if I come to the form here, we have 5 option buttons. That's opt route 1, opt route 2, opt route 3, opt route 4 and opt route 5. So it's done in a sort of generic way where you can come in and change these routes if you want to. So I've set this up. Route 1 is Dublin to Belfast, 2 Dublin to Cork and so on. So if you look at it, we have 5 option buttons here. What this bit of code here does, it checks to see if this one has been selected. So if the user selects option box 1, then this value is going to be true and all the rest of them will be false. So if the user has selected that, route number 1 will get a value of 1, and it also takes from the caption of this one here. So it will take the caption of that option button and it will assign that into the string variable here called route. So if I step through this here, the best way to this is to put a break into here, I think. If I put a break on there, so if I run it, and say I pick Dublin to Cork, I pick the second route, so if I go F8, opt route 1 value should be false, because I picked the second route. Opt route 2 value is true, therefore it comes in here and sets the route number equal to 2. It also sets the route, it takes the caption off that option box and it selects that. So if I say print route number here, and route, at the moment I haven't executed that, so route is empty, but if I then execute that statement, you can see that route number is equal to 2, and the route is taking the caption off that option box, which is 2 full stop space Dublin to Cork. So once it comes out of here, it executes those 2 lines and then it skips down to the end of. If it then comes, I think our option fare type was the first one, so that value should be true. It is. So our fare type number is equal to 1, and the fare type is going to take the caption off that radio button, up that option button, so it should put in one way in here. So if I then come down here and I print these off in the immediate window, so I'll print fare type, and what's the other one? Fare type number, fare type number, and fare type. So fare type number is 1, and fare type is one way, basically. Then, having figured out the route number and the fare type number, it then comes into this nested if blocks. So if the route number is equal to 1, well in this case it's not, it's equal to 2, so it's going to skip through the outer block down to here. Route number is equal to 2, that is correct, so it should come into this nested if block in here. Our fare type number is equal to 1, therefore this is going to be true, and it comes in and sets the fare at 65, 65. It skips now down to this end if on the inner if block, and then it should skip out to the end of the outer block. So we're looking at the nested if block there, and there what it does here is it uses the mid function, which basically takes the route. If you remember, if I print the route here, it has two full stop space Dublin to Cork. When we print out the route, we don't want the full stop or the space. So the mid function takes this variable called route, and it extracts from the 4th point onwards, so that means it extracts from the D onwards to the end. Len route tells you the length of this overall of this string. So we'll extract from this string, come from here to here, and we'll extract from the 4th character in that string to the end of the string, and assign that as the caption on label fare route. Label fare type also does the same with the fare type, and then the label amount caption takes the fare that was worked out here. So if we look at the code, you can see that it puts the value in here correctly. Same thing here. I'll just run through this. F5 runs through it and it extracts 3665. Okay, so that's the one that works using nested if blocks. How can we actually adapt that to use arrays? Well, the way it works is if I come down here, I've already done some of the work on it here. I basically can come into the code here. And what I do here is, if I look back at the table, I'm going to use, for these values here, I'm going to use a two-dimensional array. So I'll just fill it in there. It's going to have 5 rows and it's going to have 3 columns. Each row corresponds to a different route, and each column corresponds to a different fare type. So it's one way. The first column corresponds to all the one-way fares. The second column corresponds to all the one-day return fares, and the third column corresponds to all the open return fares. So each element of fares, this one here, if I call this fares, that will be fares 3, 2. And that will correspond to the fare for Dublin to Galway and the one-day return fare. If it's fares, if I say we're looking at fares 3, 2, we're looking at the third row. So we come down 1, 2, 3, and we go to the second column, 1, 2, and that tells us that that value is stored in there. It'll be 39.10, which is the one-day return fare for the Dublin to Galway route. So basically with this table here, I've assigned all those values across to it. So fares 1, 1 is the 38. That's the one-way fare for Dublin to Belfast. Fares 1, 2 is equal to 40. That is the one-day return for Dublin to Belfast. And fares 1, 3 is 55, and that is the open return for Dublin to Belfast. So the first subscript refers to the row, and that basically tells you what the route is. Then this is the same data for the second route, the same data for the third route, the same data for the fourth route. It's basically the one-day return and open returns. If I come back here, these are all the one-way values. These are the one-day return values, and these are the open return values. fares basically. Now the program works the same way to when it scans through all the option buttons for the 5 different routes to determine which route number the user has chosen. So it works the same way as the last one. Also with the option fares, it runs through the 3 different buttons, 1, 2, 3, these different option buttons here, and it checks to see which one of these 3 has been selected. If it's the first one, it sets fare type 1 number to 1. If it's the second, its fare type number is going to be 2. If it's the third one, fare type number is going to be 3. You can see that in the code here as well. If we click in on the code, you can see that that is shown here. Fare type number is equal to 1, fare type is 1 way, and so on. So the code is the same up to this point. You need the if blocks here to work out the route number, and here you need the if block to work out the fare type number. Now here we have a complex nested if block, and this is where it can be simplified, that we can just get rid of the whole thing here and I'll replace it with this simple line here. Because if you think about it, we know what route, if we've gone through this section here, we know what the route number is, so we know which row of the table the fare is on. And if we go through this if block here, we know which column of the table it's on. Is it one way, is it one day return, or is it open return? Which one has the user selected? This short if block here will determine that. Once we know those 2 subscripts, we can just extract the value from this table that we set up here. And therefore, instead of the very complex nested if block, we have simply used a 5 by 3 2-dimensional array, 5 rows, 3 columns. We store the values in there, and when we figure out which route has been selected by the user and what the fare type is, we can just extract the value from the 2-dimensional array. So if I run this program here, it runs exactly the same way as the last one. You can see as I change it, Dublin to Galway open return is 5140, Dublin to Galway one day return is 3910. If I change the route, it also changes. In fact, this button down here isn't actually needed, because once you make these changes, it automatically reflects the correct trip details here. Okay, so thank you for listening. What you'll be given for this exercise is the starter value. You'll actually be given the existing program with the nested if blocks, and your job will be to adapt that so that you can replace it with arrays. So your job basically will be to put in these 5 rows here, or 15 statements, and then replace the nested if block with this simple statement here, and you get the program to run from there. Okay, thank you very much for listening.